Welcome to CDAF's November workshop, where we're going to be talking about planning impact case studies. So I've got some brief notes here, so I'll just share some of these here. Okay, so welcome everybody again. We're part, just for those of you who don't know, the CDAF Committee of Departments of Accounting and Finance is part of BAFA, so we're one of the special interest groups. We're a slightly different group in comparison to all of the other special interest groups in that we're a membership group. So as you probably heard earlier on, David was talking about membership, and it would be absolutely great if any of you are interested, not as individuals, but as an institution. If you are interested in joining CDAF, then please do put your name into the chat line there, and David can follow up with an email. So it would really be the head of your department or your associate head of department who would we would follow up with in terms of getting membership agreed and put in place. Okay, so just a few minor things about Zoom. You're probably all accustomed to it now, but just in case you're not, it would be great if you can keep your cameras on. And also if you could add your name so that everyone knows who you are. You can, if there's enough space, you might want to add your institution, because it's quite good to know where people are from, as David is saying. It would be good also if you could mute your mic while you're not talking, as sometimes there's interference. And throughout the session today, we would like you to use the chat function in terms of any questions you have, or indeed any queries or observations that you have, because quite often when we're in a Zoom conversation, if we're not been given the opportunity to ask a question there and then, we forget what has been said, etc. So what we're encouraging you to do is to add any questions or observations as we proceed with the workshop, so that we'll remember them, and we'll be monitoring the chat function to make sure that we pick up on all of those. Of course, if you want to share a link, if there is a link that you think would be important for others to know about, then please do add that to your chat function. And then later on, if you want to ask questions, we'll be having some time to ask questions after each of the sessions. Then please do raise your hand, and you know how to do that. We're all quite accustomed to that, I'm sure. So in terms then of what we're going to do today, first of all, welcome everybody. I've already done that. I'm going to say something about setting the scene in terms of what an impact case study is, bearing in mind that not everyone in the room is from a research background, will not necessarily know how these impact case studies fit into the grander scheme of research practice within universities. I will then ask Professor Kelum Jayasinghe. I hope I've pronounced that right. Kelum, apologies if I haven't. Professor at Essex Business School, and Kelum, you're going to talk about planning an impact case study. My understanding is you submitted an impact case study, which is quite an unusual thing in accounting. I'll explain all of that in a wee while about the numbers, and we'll be really delighted that you can join us, Kelum, today, and we want to hear about your experience, in particular the difficulties involved, you know, the challenges of actually getting an impact case study to the final phase, as it were, in terms of, you know, submitting it, making sure that everything is done and dusted, as it were, in the case study. It's not an easy process. And then what we want to do, Chris, I hope you don't mind us calling you that, Chris Humphreys from Manchester Business School is going to talk about reflections and thought in terms of what is impact. Chris has been heavily involved in the Bryden report, which hopefully some of you in your auditing teaching have picked up on. If you haven't, we really should put a link into it there in the chat line. It is something that we all who are teaching auditing should be aware of. So Chris, you're going to talk about your experiences of kind of coming to impact, but the difficulties involved in that. We're going to take then a short break for coffee to stretch your legs, and then we'll come back. You can bring your coffee back if you want to the breakout rooms. And really the aim of the workshop is not simply for us just to talk at you, but it's to get you to think about how can you make your research more impactful. Secondly, who are the potential beneficiaries? And thirdly, what are the potential benefits and pitfalls of engaging more in impact activities? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, even if you are going to engage in impact activities, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be involved in writing an impact case study. And I think it's important to make that distinction. And then finally, we'll come back for a group feedback session and next steps. So really, that'll be a discussion. So it would be good if each group, each breakout room was to write down, nominate somebody who can be a spokesperson to provide some general feedback about these 3 questions. And then we'll close the workshop, and we can hang on if you want for some networking if you would like to. So just first of all, by way of setting the scene for impact case studies. Now, impact case studies, you've probably heard the term being bandied around, and perhaps you know or you don't know, they are part of what is called, they have been part of recently, the Research Excellence Framework. We call it the REF, and you've probably heard your colleagues, even if you're not doing research, talking about the REF. Now, this REF process, it's recently been called the REF, but in reincarnations in previous years, it was called the RAE. Same sort of thing, the research assessment exercise started way back in 1986, 1989, and those two periods, it was called the research selectivity exercise. Okay, there's been various changes along the way. You can see there that it has rumbled on since 1986 to 1992, 96, 2001, and 2008. So it's this exercise of assessing outputs in terms of, generally in those earlier days, it was all about assessing publications, academics' publications, has rattled on for some years now. And as I said, it was started to be called the REF in 2014. And the REF 2014 introduced the idea of impact. And the recent REF that has just been completed in December 2020, it's called REF 2021, and it covered the period 2014 to 2020. Now, you'll notice here that the time frame for these assessment exercises has been getting slightly larger, and that's, I think, to be welcome, particularly with respect to impact, because it takes a lot of time for impact to be achieved. So in the 2021 REF, impact was retained, and it actually was, the importance of it was increased slightly. Now, the next REF, they're talking about it already, is going to be in around 2028. Lord knows we'll only get, that'll only be confirmed in due course. And it will be some time before really we know what's going to happen with the impact. Personally, I'd like to see the impact element of the REF being increased so that research has relevance in the real world. And that's something I'd like the comments of Kelum and Chris about, perhaps. So just a few bits more in terms of setting the scene. The research, the REF or the RE, whatever you want to call it, is undertaken by the 4 higher education funding bodies: Research England, the Scottish Funding Council, Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, and the Department for the Economy Northern Ireland. So each of these bodies get involved in the REF exercise. It's a huge exercise. Now, why do we have this thing called the REF? In the old days, we didn't have the REF. Academics simply produced did their research and produced their publications. Some would argue that the REF has created some negative unintended consequences, and that maybe is the case, but we could debate that, and we could have a whole workshop. In fact, we could have a couple of workshops in that, but we're just here really to talk about the impact side of things. But just to give you an idea of why the REF is carried out, there are a couple of reasons. One, to provide accountability for the public's investment in research, and so the public can understand the benefits of that investment. Secondly, to provide benchmarking information and also established reputational yardsticks within the HE sector. And what you'll frequently, or what you will nearly always see, is that the league tables will bring into them some element of research. That's how that fits in. And then finally, and probably just as important as the league tables, is the funding that individual institutions get from the REF process. So it informs the allocation of funding for research. So all of those are important. At an institutional level, the benchmarking is important, as is the funding. Because as you know, we're all in the business of competing against each other. So it's all about trying to attract students, isn't it? So the higher up the rankings you can go, the better. I don't necessarily agree with the league tables because I think they create perverse incentives as well. But that's just the way it is, I suppose. Okay, in terms of then how the whole process works, because so you have the academics who produce the outputs, who produce the case study, the impact case studies, but then the whole thing is evaluated by an expert panel. So some of you in your institutions, some of the individuals you maybe work with will be on those panels. I know one of my colleagues is on the panel and she's reading hundreds of papers each week at the moment. It's really quite time consuming. But there are essentially 4 panels. You'll see them there, A, B, C, D. Where accounting and finance fits in, we're in with the social sciences, panel C. And then serving those 4 main panels, we have a number of sub-panels. And those sub-panels have representation from the various areas. So there are accounting people and finance people in there. I think there's maybe about 4 accounting and finance representatives. I can't quite remember, but I look that up in the after I finish speaking if you want. The sub panel that there's 34 of them, as I say, which cover all of those panels A, B, C, and D. So these are sub panels that relate to the big panels, the 4 big panels. The one that we're the one that is of relevance to us is business and management studies. So that's sub-panel number 17. So that sub-panel comprises individuals not only from accounting and finance, but from all different aspects of management. So we only have some say in that there, I suppose. And the way the thing works is that institutions like your individual institution, accounting and finance and management, etc., you will be invited to make submissions into these 34 units of assessment. So you will all be making a submission within your university or your faculty into sub-panel 17. Okay, and as I say, there are a number of people in sub-panel 17. They will evaluate your work, including the impact case studies, and that goes into the overall rating. Okay, so in terms of REF 2021, I'm just picking that because that's the most recent one. The quality of the submissions is assessed based on 3 things. First of all, the outputs. Now, the outputs, these are the academic publications. So this is, where we talk about peer-reviewed journals. This is really what we're talking about, okay? And you can see here, I don't know if this is clear, but the total number of outputs that any one unit of assessment is permitted or was permitted to submit in this most recent REF, which ended in December 2020, is the number of full-time equivalent staff multiplied by 2.5, and that gives you the total number of outputs required. Now, there is a lot of detail in the REF website about who is eligible for submission. When they talk about FTEs there, so this is equivalent FTEs, and they talk about, for example, the fact that an FTE has to include someone who is in employment at least a rate of 0.2 of a full-time equivalent. And they also must have, these individuals, either primary function either needs to be research only or teaching and research. So there's all sorts of rules about who was allowed to be submitted. This is what I'm getting at in terms of this outputs. The second aspect of the REF 21 was the impact. Now you'll see that I forgot to say that the outputs contributed 60% of the overall rating to outputs. 25% of the overall rating or the quality was assessed on the basis of impact. So you can see a quarter of the rating. You can see that impact case studies are actually becoming really important. Do you see that? And then finally, the last 15% of the overall rating was in relation to the environment. So this would be things like the sort of environment that you have to support academics and students, etc., get on with their research. That could be like a doctoral college, or it could be mentoring activities or different support activities that you maybe have, you know, for people returning from maternity, so paternity leave, that sort of thing. And then for those of you who maybe don't know this here, quality, the quality of all of these outputs and impact case studies is assessed on the basis of this star rating. So you have, it goes from 1 star to 4 star. So you can see 1 star, for example, is quality that is recognized nationally. So it's the nationally that's the important thing here. 4 star is quality that is world leading. And up until the 2014 REF, we were permitted to submit 4 2-star articles, and institutions got funding from those. But in the most recent REF, that has changed. It has to be 3-star or above. Well, I think that's certainly changed for Northern Ireland. I think it is the same. Maybe Chris or Kelum can confirm that whenever I'm finished speaking. I think it is the same for England, Scotland, and Wales. So what about impact itself? So we're now looking more specifically at these impact case studies. Now, there is an awful lot of paperwork and instructions and guidance around these impact case studies. So I'm really only scratching the surface. But impact is defined in these guidance as an effect on, change, or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment, or quality of life beyond academia. So you see what's happening here. So it's all about moving beyond academia and having an impact beyond academia. Now, in the last REF, the impact had to cover the period between August 2013 and 31st July 2020. In other words, you had to be able to say, if you were submitting an impact case study, that the impact occurred between those dates. Hopefully that's clear. And we're interested to hear the experiences of Chris and Kelum in terms of how they managed to get their evidence, what the problems were, etc. Now, the impact must also be pinned by excellent. In other words, 2-star above. Remember that thing there? So the impact must be underpinned by excellent 2-star or above research undertaken in the REF period. So not only do you have to demonstrate that you have done the impact based on this definition, this broad definition here, you then must also have the relevant publication. So it's to undertake a case study is quite a job. Now, how many, I talked earlier on and I referenced or I indicated that there are relatively few accounting impact case studies. I think that'll be an interesting thing to look at you know, at the end of this, that REF cycle. How many accounting impact case studies were submitted, because we are in competition, don't forget, in terms of we're going in under unit of assessment 17. So we're in competition with all the other people in that unit of assessment. I hope that I make that clear. So there may be other, or there will be other case studies that other people in management or marketing or entrepreneurship or whatever it is that goes, you know, combines or comprises unit of assessment 17. We're essentially in competition with those people. So the number of case studies submitted. So institutions based on this last REF were required to include 2 impact case studies where you had up to 19.99 full-time equivalent staff submitted, plus 1 further impact case per 15 full-time staff submitted. So that kind of gives you this table here. So the minimum, what we're saying here is the minimum number of cases you had to submit was 2, and then that increases. But you can see, for example, if you think about, say, the unit of assessment, I don't know how many people you have in your institution, but say we had category A. Remember, this is category A. Now, these are people that are only doing either research only or teaching and research, yeah? Now, that's not the total faculty, obviously, for business or management, because a lot of people in the faculty will be they will be assigned to teaching only. This is where we had this whole debate around teaching only contracts. I'm sure that you were all assessed in your unit of assessment as to whether or not you were in the ref or out of the ref. So even, you know, if you take, for example, my own institution, I think we were probably between that 35 to 49.99. I think, I can't remember, which meant we had to get four impact case studies. So you can see the number of impact case studies is quite small. Do you see that? So for an accounting person to get one developed and accepted is quite a feat. Okay, so just to give you an idea, remember I said that the impact case studies were around in the REF 2014. The number of cases that were actually submitted was 6,975. Now that's right across the board for all the 4 panels. 44% of those were judged outstanding, i.e. the 4-star. And there is an element that you have to make these case studies international. So there were 205 countries mentioned at that time. Now, I'm sure Kelum can maybe tell us more about this, because I'm interested how, Kelum, you met these criteria of reach and significance. Okay, so this first one, the reach, these are the 2 criteria, for assessing an impact case study, reach and significance. The first one is the reach is the extent and or the diversity of the beneficiaries of the impact. So this is really who or whom the impact affects. Okay. The second one is the significance. This is the degree to which the impact has enabled, read all these things, enriched, influenced, informed, or changed performance, policies, practices, products, services, understanding, awareness, or well-being of the beneficiaries. So the first one, reach, is about more related to who it impacts, and the second one is more about how it impacts. I hope I've got that right, Kelum, and you can maybe correct me if I've got that wrong. Now, we've had lots of seminars in Ulster University about research impact, and we were told that there's a number of things that it's not, so I just wanted to reiterate this. It's not knowledge exchange. You know, some of us get knowledge exchange vouchers, yeah, or we get, there's a whole range of funding that goes with knowledge exchange, but that's not impact. It's not just purely dissemination. Dissemination doesn't count, although you probably, in working up an impact case study, you are going to have to do lots of dissemination. It's not just about public engagement, and it's not just about the potential for impact to occur. So it's quite a tricky one here. Now, we have some guidance, and again, as I say, this is really only tipping our toes into the water. We do have some guidance about what makes us a strong case study. So this is feedback from the 2014. So it's things like a clear and compelling narrative, because you have to include a narrative of what the impact actually has been. Clearly identified beneficiaries, etc. Verifiable evidence of reach and significance. So you have to get, for example, letters, or you have to be able to demonstrate that you've had reach and significance. I'll not go through all of them, but over here on this side, superficial impacts would be a low scoring one. Now, there is actually, for those of you who are interested in this, there is a website. I'll have a look to see if I can locate it whenever Kelum's speaking, where you can actually locate all of the previous impact case studies that have been submitted to REF. And quite often, if you're thinking about going down the road of REF, it's a good idea to maybe read some of those to get an idea of what it entails. So just really to finish off, these are some of the things that I had thought about, certainly coming from our institution, some of the guidance around how do you ensure that your work is impactful? Now, I just want to reiterate again, we're not necessarily saying that you're going to have to write an impact case study. That is not what we're saying. We're saying you still can engage in impactful activities, yet not produce an impact case study. And I think we all have a duty, actually, as accounting and finance academics, to do that and to, you know, improve the environment and the context that we live in, so, or we operate in. So here's some of the things you may think about. Who are the audiences for your research, and what are the potential actual impacts on them? Is there any impact at all? Or are you just writing a paper for the sake of writing a paper? And that's something to think about. When should you engage with stakeholders? I mean, all the advice suggests that you need to engage with them very early on in the process if you're going to write an impact case study. It needs to be, impact needs to be designed in from the very start, otherwise it's not going to happen. How will you communicate, engage with the stakeholders? So it's not just about disseminating the findings of your research, it's about actually engaging with them to effect impact. How will you translate the materials that you produce into meaningful engagement with the stakeholders? And finally, how can you best describe evidence and analyze the pathways from research to impact? That's the trick here. And this is what Kelum has done. So Kelum, you're going to hopefully talk to us in a moment about how did you traverse that journey from research to impact, because you have to be able to demonstrate that in your case study. So we're running we started 10 minutes late, but we'll speed up. Well, there is plenty of you know, slack in the system here. So Kelum, if I could ask you first of all to maybe talk about planning the impact case study, and then we'll have some questions, and then we'll go back to Chris, who will talk about reflections and thoughts in terms of what is impact, and we'll have our coffee break then at okay, right. Actually, I noticed there's a mistake there in that coffee break, but not to worry, I will change that in a moment. Okay, so Kelum, can we maybe start? Where are you?
Yep, I'm here.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Have you any slides, or are you happy?
Yeah. I have a few slides, so I just want to share them first.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. So before starting this, my talk about planning and impact case study, I have to express here this. What I'm going to talk is my reflections and my journey from started in certain few years, several years ago, and towards this 2021 impact case study that I developed at the end. So it's more like a journey. I call it impact case development journey. So it's the reflections throughout, I mean, in my journey, that what happened, how I had this opportunity to develop the cases, I mean, meet this the stakeholders, and how I developed myself in throughout my research that led to this these meetings and the conversations with these stakeholders that who were interested to bring me in for their sort of institutional level policy development work that I've been involved later on. So it's more like a reflection overall about this my journey. And so, but I will relate it to the planning. I mean, how I plan, and how anyone who is interested to plan a case study, so how they can do it. So that also kind of a link that with my reflections at the end. I think there's a good introduction to impact cases and what's impact case, and how the ref panels are looking at it, and everything given very nicely by Jean already given that idea. But I thought that just to start with this, how the ref panel, and then how the guidance given to us about this, what is the meaning of an impact case. So that's a very good starting point. So the impact is broadly defined in 2021, and I mean, as that demonstrate an effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, and broadly some kind of a change in the policy or the practice. So that's from our contribution. So that's sort of, there are two things we have to highlight, we have to show, demonstrate tangible evidence that there's a change happen in the policy or practice or the, of in a distinctive field. And then number two is we have to provide evidence this change happened with our contribution and our involvement and sort of activities as well as our own research evidence that led to this whole overall change process. So that's a very important part. For example, in my case, so I have co-produced some guidelines and policies on disaster risk reduction in working with UNDRR, and then there's a broader thing. So I had two things. One is the international level involvement with the UN's UNDRR, disaster risk reduction. That there's an advocacy group, and then also the Sri Lankan government. And I work with Sri Lanka, New Zealand, and Indonesia, several governments. But impact case, I specifically link with my work with the Sri Lankan government. So that means that the international level policy brought into action at the Sri Lankan government level, and specifically the local government level. I'll explain that how it happens and how I started it and how it happened at the end. So broadly, two institutions are involved with UNDRR, and in the Sri Lankan governments, there's one center called Disaster Management Center. They are the ones involving with this disaster risk reduction activities in the context of Sri Lanka. Okay. Yeah. So one of the crucial things in this impact case, the final piece of the impact case is the evidence. And so I think without evidence, you cannot claim even to have research publications and the knowledge transfer activities and policy workshops, everything. But in this evidence and tangible evidence, like even qualitative and quantitative evidence, like for example, if there's a document published we co-produce with an institution, that co-produced document is guiding the organizations, institutions, or local governments in my case, and specifically about that advisors or like some kind of guidelines. So we had the advisors and the guidelines both in my one, some descriptive, some narratives, guidelines as a part of the guidelines. So that's specifically those evidence, and quantitative and other evidence, like more like statistical evidence, like the modeling, and then the kind of a framework or model that to follow. So there are many such evidence you can have, and then this evidence should be more like approved and more like justified by the testimonials from the stakeholders, like the people that, for example, in my case, I have got the evidence and a letter from the UNDRR advocacy chair saying that my work specifically helped their institution to develop this document. There's a document published by the UNDRR. So then the advocacy chair issued me a letter saying very clearly that I was the only accountant involved in their working group that helped them to develop this document, and specifically he narrated the sections that my contribution been happened. And then that's one of the very one of the strong sort of evidence. And then I got another testimony from the disaster management center that's under the Ministry of Sri Lankan Disaster Management Ministry of Sri Lanka. So they gave testimonies that then how my contribution changed the local practice, and as a guide came from UNDRR document, but then the local policies and the local practice have been transformed into kind of directions of the guidance of UNDRR. So then I did some workshops as well to actively engage with all these local stakeholders who are involved with disaster risk reduction. So then these workshops also designed on the basis of this UNDRR document and the framing that I've been involved personally with others. I was not the only one. There were around 30 people involved at the UNDRR committee, but I was the only accountant. So then in the UNDRR advocacy chair document, he highlighted that fact that I was the only accountant because it's accountability and governance. So then my inputs from the perspective of accountability was a crucial factor, that crucial input for them to understand and narrate in the document. So what I mentioned are these two things: the evidence and the testimonials, and testimonials as evidence, as in fact. And then these are two very important things. Okay, so then I will go back to this the start of my case study and the reflections, and then how anybody can think about, plan about a potential case and potential impact case later on. So one of the things that we need to do is that we have to look at our own research and then understand who we are first. And then, because this most of the things, like even when we are applying for chair positions in the universities and in our certain time of our careers, this is something that at the interview panel interviewers asking that who are you, what is your specialism. Sometimes when we apply to jobs, then we also specifically say my work is sustainability accounting, or my work is disaster accounting, accountability, or broadly accounting and accountability. So so we need to understand who we are first, and then when we are searching this our sort of reputation outside, and then the readings of ourselves outside, we have to understand ourselves first by us. So that means, so in my case, for example, so my work is very much throughout these years, like specifically in the last 5 years, but in general in the 10 years, my work is in the public sector, and mainly public sector accounting and accountability. So in the last 5 years specifically, I was focusing on disaster accounting and accountability, broadly climate actions and climate change. Even now, the last 2 years, I am working on those ones. But then my case study period was like from 2008 to 2021. So you can see a longer period, 2008 to 2021. So my PhD and my early work talk about this poverty alleviation. But then it all the connection to public sector accountability, the state, role of the state's involvement in the poverty alleviation, because the community is involved with the disasters and the risks sort of issues. They are the same community living below poverty. So my work throughout 2008 to 2021 was framing in that area. So then because of this, my extensive involvement in the public sector accounting and accountability, I was known to this some of these institutions, and then my cases that my work is quoted by some of the documents and some of these national level publications. So then with those my connections with the sort of stakeholders, non-governmental organizations, and the national level public organizations. So I had this privilege to meet these stakeholders at the national level as well as some international level. For example, specifically that we organize a workshop with funding from University of Essex, that we organize a workshop with Sri Lankan government, Sri Lanka's Disaster Management Center. This workshop been held in Colombo. So to that workshop, one of the key speakers that came from UNDRR. So in that workshop, we had this. I did a presentation, and then after the workshop, actually, this UNDRR chair, advocacy chair, he came to me and said, "So you are the one we were looking at an a person is accountability background to contribute our sort of conversations and our working group activities in relation to Sendai framework. Sendai framework means that's the disaster governance framework developed by UN for its member countries. So Sri Lanka was one of the countries, Sri Lanka. So it's for all member countries. So then this UN advocacy chair that time, they were trying to develop some words into action. Sendai framework, words into action document. Words into action document mean simplifying the bigger, very complex and complicated words in the Sendai framework into simple words, and then communicate this Sendai framework to local stakeholders. That means national governments, local governments, NGOs, businesses working in the disaster risk management field. So then they wanted someone to help them. So that's how all this starting thing happened. That means, so my research led me to help me to go into and reach these stakeholders, and then I had developed my reputation as a public sector and public sector accounting and accountability scholar. And then, I got the invitations in this, not just one, and I had invitations from New Zealand. I went to New Zealand and did some work with the New Zealand government and then local governments. So I published this paper, key paper, you can see in this same slide. So one of these papers in 2017 is one of the co-authors, Jerry Walsukres, is the advocacy chair. So he also joined that paper. So we are funded by University of Massey. So there, I have no time to tell you everything, but I have done so much of work in relation to this area of disaster accounting, accountability in connection with the public sector before this impact case development. So invitations to present, invitation for the projects. So ultimately that created this image for me. And then I met this person, and then so I was invited to this working group of UNDRR to take this Sendai framework into simple words. That document we call, I'm just making it in simple way to understand. It's a 75-page document at the end, but simplifying the Sendai policy. So that means that my publications or my book chapters or newspaper writings or anything can be counted, but mainly the good solid publications, and at least 6 to 10 good publications for the impact case submission. I think we use 6 key papers, so including the one that I mentioned here. So these papers have to be linked with the work that you are doing with the external stakeholder or the holders. So that's why this is a very significant point at the beginning, identifying ourselves and building our reputation in a certain direction, and then connecting with the sort of institutions and the stakeholders in the same direction. So if I did another one, what we are doing now, so we done a project with World Bank Essex team of 5 people. We done a workshop, a project to World Bank PIFA, public public management, they are on the public management framework for member countries, so World Bank member countries. So they wanted us to look at the climate investment policies that these governments are following. So they have a climate investment policy document by PIFA, so they want to amend that document based on our inputs. So we already done the project. Now then we got the money from GCRF. Well, actually we got the money today. So we are going to do this because our previous study was in Sri Lanka, India and Nepal. So we got the money from GCRF now to take this report into these 3 governments and then educate and then help these national governments in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka to consider about their own climate investment policy and then make some changes and improvements. So this World Bank is involving in these 3 workshops we are going to do in the Sri Lanka, India and Nepal. So this case study we are planning for 2026 or 7, whenever the next going to happen. So I'm saying this is very important that this connection. And this shows the I already talked about it. This showed the timeline that of activities that I've been involved and doing that led to my case study later on. See, 2015, this December, Colombo workshop is what I explained. 2016, Geneva UN meeting with the technical working group. And then in 2016, June, draft policy that the UN developed and published that later on. It's actually publication came out in 2019, but the draft policy guide. So then this draft policy guide, UN has taken to UN conferences. Yeah, UN doing some conferences to member countries, representatives. They presented this draft policy. Some of our team members presented the draft policy to representatives of this Ministry of Disaster Management of these member countries. And so it's called. Yeah, so then 2016-17 consultation work, that's what that I have done later on myself, involved and as a representative of UNDRR. I presented that at the New Zealand Joint Center for Disaster Research, and then Australian School of Engineering, and India and Sri Lanka, several institutions. I presented this outline for the experts in this disaster risk reduction area, and then given back the feedback to our steering committee of UNDRR. And then there was 2019 policy document launched, and then 2019-20 I involved with localization work. I call it workshop specifically in Sri Lanka with the document, and then make them understand and then transform their policies into that direction. So you see, there's not one activity, and then you can see that these activities involve. So I mean, it spread in too many, more than 1 year from 2015. But my research started in 2008. So the case study is from 2008 to 2021. But then my activity started in 2015 specifically, because from 2008 to 15 took me some time to position myself and then communicate myself as a researcher, and then my work in relation to public sector accountability, accounting and accountability. So the stakeholders started knowing me when it's come to this in my later, middle stage of the career. I started my career as a lecturer in 2006. So by 2012, 15, that time, so people started knowing me. Stakeholders, not the academics, the outside. Academics always know each other because of publications. So you can see the chain of events. That's not straightforward, but it's complicated and difficult, but it's possible. So some of this example evidence that I used, and anyone developing case study, you can think about. I mentioned this as testimonial and evidence both. So the letter from Disaster Management Ministry and Spark, one of the co-editors of this document, and then workshop concept notes, and then formal invitation letters, UN documents, letters, testimonial from advocacy chair, testimonial from Disaster Management Center, and I had some other testimonials from the moderator of the documents, and all this evidence, hard evidence, tangible evidence, supported my case. And so then the one of the things is very important that that we have to demonstrate the exact impact claims in the document. That's where the distinctiveness happen, and then then the unique contributions have to be highlighted. So that's where the international level and the national level. I think I made this. I already highlighted this. So then there's a unique contribution happened at the UNDR, and because of the development of implementation guidelines. And then I have proved this because the Australian government, after this bushfire happened in Australia in 2000, I think 17, 19, and then this Australian government, their Ministry of Environment and Disaster, so they use our document, and actually they got this quotations from our documents, like a 1 or 2 or 3 page kind of there's one chapter for the disaster policy, disaster reduction policy, and then chapter started, and then throughout the chapter they use our document, some of the quotes from the document. And I'm proud to say that some of these quotes that they use, and the person hiding in that quote is me, because it was my contribution in technically what is accountability, collaborative accountability, call it accountability means. So this is more like a hard evidence that this document, not just a document, this document used by the governments, and then the Sri Lankan government also used that in the local level. And then the narrative of only expert in accounting and accountability in the testimonial was crucial. And then so I think this and then the national level, so that led to direct involvement of the Sri Lankan government, and then so they informed the policy and build more collaborative approach. So they changed the approach at the local government level, how to get the collective collaborative working into this local government level disaster risk reduction. Yeah, so this is my next case. I already mentioned that the work is ongoing. My research is now coming in more in the climate change and then climate actions. I'm working with the local governments in UK and then various other institutions always, but specifically I'm taking this project, this project as my next main sort of opportunity. This is an opportunity. This is not an impact case. It's an opportunity for the new impact case in the years to come. So more publications on the line, workshops, more collaborative working with the World Bank, PIFA, and the local governments. So building up the evidence, and then later on I can get the testimonials. That's the plan. Thank you very much. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I just try to reflect my journey into my impact case development. And it is there's no formula, there's no theory. It's just the it's a very much of like a practical and kind of a knowledge sharing thing. Rather than there's no theory, there's no book published about how to develop a good impact. Maybe writings, some articles, but there's no rule like this is the way you have to do it. There's more than one way. This is my way. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, Kelum, thank you very much. That was excellent. And you're right, there doesn't seem to be a formula. And I have noticed, though, there are more, there are actually a few people out on the circuit kind of trying to tout their wares about how to do these impact case studies. So last year, or a couple of years ago at Ulster, we had one chap, and now I see they're using a different person. So there are consultancies out there who can help. Now, can we have some questions then? I mean, Kelum, it would be nice for us maybe to put into the chat line a link to that paper in due course so that people can see where they kind of all started.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've put in as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've put in as well the link to the that link that I was talking about where you can access all of the case studies. So hopefully, Kelum, will see your case study in due course after the results are out.
And also there's a university, they publish a blog and they publish my case study in the University of Essex blog. So I can share that as well.
Yes.
So it's a kind of a summarized form, but it has the main key points that any reader can grasp easily.
So can we have some questions? Will we see some questions here? Some people are saying very inspirational. Well done. Proud of you as you make impact on Sri Lankan government. Excellent. Any questions that anybody wants to ask, Kelum? So there's Sarah's asking, were you introduced to the initial contact at the conference or did you seek them out? I am not sure how to make this first step.
You want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it can happen in either way. Like sometimes, so you have to approach them sometimes because you meet them in the forums or workshops. You go and introduce yourself and say who you are and kind of, and then maybe you're doing a presentation in that workshop. So then the audience, you can see some stakeholders there. They ask questions from you. So you have this sort of informal sort of opportunities naturally coming up. So you approach them sometimes they approach you. So there's no there's no rule in that. But in some cases, they for example, like this accounting bodies, like, and then sometimes this local government bodies, they are inviting academics to help them to do in terms of consultation. They want. I involved with Basildon local council nowadays, just signing a contract, knowledge transfer contract. So they want us to write a voluntary local review, right? So it is a knowledge transacted, obviously, but that gives us the opportunity to go further. Now I am working with the Colchester Borough Council. Again, a GCRF funded smaller workshop project. It's all about participatory governance approach to climate actions. So they are trying to help the local government officials. So they invited us. Right. So I mean, in a way, if they know maybe one of the senior guys, then they approach them. So impact case development, not only single person task, now don't have teams. So like a senior person can lead, and then other staff other colleagues can join the person. Now, for example, and we have at Essex now World Bank project now. Me and another senior professor is involved with it. So there are three other. I don't call them juniors, but early career, three other researchers. So I think we have a team now. So we are working as a team. So I think this is the future of REF, isn't it? Like this is why REF consultation document clearly saying you must have teams, that the departments working as a team, not like individuals anymore. And then so these teams have to develop the impact and the research pieces together and the impact together, funding together. So grow up as a team rather than individuals. So that is where the strength can be shared. So sometimes some individuals are working more in outside, some are just working inside, just publishing the paper. So you need this kind of a collaboration.
Yeah.
Collaborative approach. So my World Bank one is a teamwork. Five people are involved in the World Bank one. So that's another different example. So my UN work, my own one. That's another one. There's no, again, there are alternative ways. This meeting, going back to the question, again, it can happen in either way. So by invitation, you go there first, and then you develop it later on with a little bit more steps. You develop this as to a concrete evidence-based impact case. And otherwise, sometimes randomly you meet the person, like in my case, from the workshop. Again, the workshop invitation came because of my work, isn't it? My research work.
Yes. Padmeen or Padmia, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, John, thank you. It's nice presentation, Kelum. It's nice to see you after a long time. And Padmi, I hope you can remember me.
Yeah.
It's just a question, basically. I'm really interested about your area, and also just to ask some advice from you, actually, because I'm developing kind of a area where we are looking at some ethnic minority women specifically, and we are looking at the financial intelligence and things like that. So we have already done some workshops and doing a very small project at the moment also. And we are, like you said about Sri Lanka, we are kind of planning about, taking in to beyond UK and see how things are happening around these women and their finance and how they do businesses and things like that in terms of combining with management accounting practices. So my question is basically, when it comes to evidence, I know it's very tricky. And we in this this small project we are doing now, we are kind of planning to create a portal where these people will be getting some kind of platform where they can share ideas and they can post blogs. And like you mentioned about testimonials, that's what I'm kind of interested about. So can we in the future, if you want to develop a case study based on that, can we use these kind of reviews or their blog or whatever these kind of things as evidence?
I think I think that's very interesting activity that you are doing at the moment. I think clearly it can create some distinctive outcome and the change in the practice. So that's where the thing that I use the word very carefully. Some distinctive change or transformation in relation to this ethnic minority women and their sort of business development or some kind of activity. So then these business development activities may be linking to poverty elevation or reducing poverty or something, some kind of a policy involvement. You have to find out some policy or practice just that can be initiated by your work. For example, maybe ethnic minority women, then there's some institutions involved with that, like maybe public institutions or non-governmental organizations. So then you have to connect not just these ethnic minority women, but the policy making institutions that working with them. So like what is this portal or this model that you are developing? Maybe something that this policy making institution can recommend for ethnic minority women in the future. These things cannot happen in the tonight, fortnight or something. You need to approach them with your early pilot work that you did, and then providing evidence, some maybe kind of a sort of a presentation or some, inviting them for your presentation of your findings of this mini project or something, and then share your work with them, and then going in your case that you can use this as evidence and early work, preliminary work that lead towards kind of a change that you can create in later on. So you need some people involving and focusing on this ethnic minority women and their businesses, maybe as a way of reducing poverty, because maybe these women are living below the poverty line. I just assuming. So then maybe that's the need. Poverty elevation is the broader policy framework, policy area. So then there are institutions working on that. So then if the institution take this account, your work, and then you publish papers as well, published and publishing on this work. So then you can use this and get this opportunity to work with them, this organization, to make this change as a concrete kind of a policy that for women, any women in that particular context or other context. So maybe that can lead to South Asian or various other more bigger level, sort of larger level, macro level kind of changes in the policies. So if you want to just focus on Sri Lanka and in Sri Lanka, that's also okay, because there's a, I remember one impact case from one of my colleagues. His work in Nepal is the Nepal government's accounting policy changes. He contributed heavily with the chartered accountancy body in Nepal, plus professional other accounting bodies working in Nepal. And then he involved with the national policy changes in relation to public sector accounting. So it was impact case he submitted. Another colleague in India. So they are work not in international, they are working national level, Indian local government level. So they talk about capacity building at the local government level. So it's possible, but the thing is, it's easy way, there's no easy way, but I mean, right, probably the best way is to connect your work with the immediate surroundings. That mean national or regional level, or kind of the institutes or the people who are focusing not as a researcher, as an advisor or advisors in this minority women and their lives, changing their lives. So then you can actually feed this your findings as inputs and then make them think about that. So inviting them to your dissemination workshops, I call it. Your project, you can organize the dissemination workshop or workshops and then invite key people into that. That's a meeting point.
Okay,
but nothing
yeah.
is guaranteed, but nothing is guaranteed, but that's the possible way of doing it.
Thank you so much.
Could I just ask or add, Padme, that I'm working with people from social policy on a project where we're hoping we've got quite a lot of impact so far, but the people from the social policy, they impact as their first job. It really comes before publications. They think about the impact of everything. So if you could team up with someone from social policy, they would know an awful lot about women in poverty, for example. They might be able to help you design your project to get better impact as you go along, and they might even join you. I mean, the Kelum's quite right, the thing about being part of a team, because you can't do it all on your own. You need people around you to help write papers and to actually do the research, because it's an time-intensive job, even doing the impact on its own. But that's just an idea. Well, look,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelum, for your responses there. I think we'll go on ahead with Chris. We'll just push the tea break on 10 minutes or so, Chris. So please don't worry if you go on into the tea break. We will get our tea break at the end, Chris. So can I ask you, Chris, now to speak to us about your experiences?
Yes, thanks, Joan, and thanks, Kelum, too. What I wanted to talk about was my experiences with, as Joan mentioned earlier, the Bryden review into the quality and effectiveness of audit, primarily the statutory financial audit, and just tell you some of the experiences that I had in relation to that, and some of the lessons that I think I learned and hopefully can pass on. I guess, though, I probably should start by, almost the question of what am I doing here, because I don't have a formal impact case. It wasn't submitted to the REF through the University of Manchester. So in some ways, you might be thinking, gosh, have we got somebody else who could tell us about impact? But I think my story is quite nice for you to sort of take some messages away from it. So I think also I see the issue of impact more broadly than just the production of an impact case, and it's brilliant to listen to people like Kelum who managed to put one together and get it through the process and get accepted, and see all the work that's gone into that. And obviously there's lots of things, if you're in the process of trying to do that you can learn from what Kelum said before. I guess my interest, though, in terms of extending beyond just the production of a case is looking at the notion of impact and reflecting on its different dimensions. And I think if you look back at the history of the REF, you can see that impact, in a sense, was introduced to almost give recognition to different forms of research that may not be getting as much coverage through the formal rankings process of publications in journals and everything, and trying to catch different dimensions of what is being achieved through research. And I guess in some ways, some of my experiences also start to reflect or build on that type of sentiment, and maybe also question the way in which some of the direction is taking us with respect to impact, and some of the things that we're forgetting in the process, or not giving what I feel may be sufficient focus. I guess I should also say that just in talking that when I was involved with the Bryden Review, I did have to sign a number of legal documents, which prevents me to a fair degree from saying directly what specifically I did in relation to the Bryden Review. I was a member of the advisory board team, but also interacted to a reasonable degree with the project team itself. I think I was the only academic advisory board member. So a bit like Kelum, you know, you can see a sort of special role there. I guess two things to start with. One is, in essence, I think my university, by the time I'd already got round to thinking about this could potentially develop into an impact case, had got a number of impact cases already well established. And so I think the general feeling was, well, give this one a little bit more time to develop, and maybe considering submission for the next ref. I just think somebody probably forgot about my age, because I'll be 63 in a couple of weeks' time, which means I'll probably be 70 by the next ref. So I'm not sure that that is going to ultimately be my priority. And in some ways, that sort of sense of bit too early and with years running out probably has also influenced the way in which I've looked at the issue of impact. I guess also I've probably not been too lucky, because I over my career, I spent a lot of time working quite closely with bodies, the other professional bodies like the Institute of Chartered Accountants England and Wales, also Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, and International Federation of Accountants, various organisations, and have felt, you know, having qualified as a chartered accountant early in my career and then going into university, has always felt that it's important to keep that connection with practice, not so much as a technician, but as a, you know, as an interested participant or voice or whatever, or a sounding board or a questioning board, whatever role that I wanted to play in that regard or felt would be useful. And I spent, you know, several years before my engagement with Bryden, I've been involved with the ICAW through being a co-opted member of its of its governing council, engaged with its technical strategy board, audit and assurance faculty, working with the Audit Futures Initiative. And a lot of that work was absolutely fascinating. And I learned an awful lot from that. And so I think one of the main themes that I want to talk about impact is not so much just the impact that you can demonstrate, but it's also the impact that these engagements have on you, yourself as an academic. And I think that is the bit that I have seen over the last couple of years to probably been the most interesting thing to reflect on, is how this whole process changed me and made me think differently about my role as an academic. So even though I don't have an impact case, I think there are a number of interesting reflections to make with respect to, as I said earlier, the nature of impact. What I think I might do is just in starting is really sort of run through just some of the prehistory to my engagement with the Bryden Review. And I think in that is just to reinforce what Kelum said about there is no one template in terms of having impact. And I think, if anything, the second main point that I'll try and draw out as I go through this is you can see from the very general definition that Joan put up about impact, you know, that's quite broad-based and would capture lots of different things. But what it then eliminates in a way through some of the processes or rules that were put in place is that it's got to be demonstrable, evidence-based impact. And I think that in itself can be quite a constraining factor. Obviously, I understand, you know, you can't just claim massive amounts of impact and not provide evidence. But that notion of judging impact, I think, rules out or constrains the way in which people behave in relation to the impact that they're having as academics. And I think what I found in my own experiences of the Bryden Review, if I had followed explicitly these sort of evidence-based rules and requirements, I think I would have had far less impact than I feel I did have. That if I'd gone around, for instance, trying to plug papers that I published, you know, and dropping papers in people's offices or mailboxes or whatever, saying, please, please, I'm engaged with this. Can you just have a look at this? Because I need some evidence. I need to demonstrate that I've had some impact. I think people would have disregarded a lot of what I was saying. So in some sense, you know, the way the impact process makes you an interested participant itself is potentially problematic, because I think it could shift the way in which you behave as an academic within these processes. And you're not selling yourself as some sort of impact, you know, consultant or whatever. So it's quite interesting as well just to hear what Joan was saying about the way in which impact case study development processes are being promoted. I think you're going in there in these arenas as a sort of interested, you know, fair-minded, questioning, lively, creative, thoughtful individual who probably says things given their training, or thinks things given their training and experience, that others more closely engaged to practice will not say, think, express, do, whatever. And I think what I've found over the years with my engagement with practice is, while I've actually learned enormous amounts from listening to people far closer to the coalface of practice to me, you know, I've learned awful lots about people way more experienced in the practice environment than me, way more senior in terms of the positions and roles that they're fulfilling. At the same time, I felt I've been able to almost live with those people, not by shouting my mouth off, not by having an opinion on everything, but just being able to facilitate their thoughts, their discussions, their thinking, their ideas in a sense, and throwing out to them, you know, almost questions. So why do you think like that? Why do you take that opinion? Or what led you to take that opinion? And I think that engagement in some sense is probably, you can see a reflection of that in the Bryden Review. I mean, the Bryden report itself is quite an interesting report, because it was initially commissioned on really, or the initial idea for the Bryden report came around about a concern with the long-standing audit expectations gap, the fact that, or the view that the public wants more from auditing than auditors feel they're supposed to be delivering. And I think, again, it was underpinned with a hope or belief that if we have this sort of independent investigation, we can close the expectation gap. What Bryden did as a report was essentially come out with two key statements, in my view, or propositions, with that the way forward is to revise the concept, scope, purpose, role of audit. And clearly what's in Bryden's report is an expansion in the role, scope of audit, from just being about the truth, assessing the truth and fairness of financial statements, to helping to build and maintain what he referred to as deserved confidence in the company, its directors, and the information it makes public, which includes the financial statements. And that expanded role was connected also with the development of what he argued was something that doesn't exist at the moment, which is an auditing profession. We have a lot of accountants who do audits, but we don't have a formal auditing profession. And those two, I think, in a sense, taking a broader view of audit and also reflecting on what that meant for the profession itself, gave Bryden's report a very conceptual status, in a sense, and it's quite a deep thinking report. And what's really intriguing when you see it is that it's underpinned by a lot of references to academic literature, and not my academic papers by and large, but lots of other academic papers from a whole range of journals. And I think in that sense, you can see that maybe the role of an academic in sort of seeking out impact is not necessarily to seek out impact for themselves, but also to try and, you know, get greater publicity, visibility, engagement of the broader intellectual agenda or discipline or knowledge base that we're working with. So I think in many respects that my lessons and experiences from engaging in what I felt was impact. I mean, you can read the Bryden report, and there are explicit references to some things that I said or have written. And there are also ideas that directly relate to me, but some of them came out as an incredible surprise. I think the first thing I knew that I was involved with a colleague of mine, Carrie-Anne Van Morik at the Open University, making a proposal for public interest entities to issue a public interest statement or report, in a sense, delineating how they felt they were working in the public interest without specifying what public interest meant, but just trying to enhance that sort of nature of disclosure, just given all the claims that are being made for serving the public interest, but getting companies to say in their words what they wanted. That some of those things came very much as a surprise to me to find them in the report when it came out, but interesting to see that they've been picked up on. But I think the broader satisfaction that you get from reading the report is just how relevant so much of the work that's being done in the accounting and finance discipline is to some investigation that chooses to take a more conceptual basis rather than, say, pursuing a quick regulatory fix. I think the other thing is how much of pursuing anything in relation to impact can come as a surprise. So if I did, just go back to some of the pre-engagement with Bryden, I've been working on audit research probably now for getting on for nearly 40 years. And I suspect for the large part of that, I have avoided almost explicitly getting any publicity in relation to the work that I'm doing, because almost a fear of risk that you'll say the wrong thing in certain places or whatever. And I started on this avenue by getting a surprise phone call from somebody working for the BEI Select Committee, a Business Energy Industrial Strategy Department, who were just reviewing the future of audit, and they asked whether I would go and give oral evidence to one of their select committee hearings, which, if you've ever watched any of the video recordings of select committee hearings, is quite a stressful arena to be in, So it was only because one of my administrative colleagues persuaded me to do it that I ever did it. So, in some sense, again, thinking back on impact, you need people to support you in pursuing some of these things, because I think the inherent thing for most people is probably to steer clear of it, unless you're desperately after some set of publicity, whatever, or self-promotion. So once you start, it's a little bit like the football match, where people say you're really nervous until you step out on the pitch. And I can remember going to the House of Commons and being really, pretty petrified about this experience. But I actually got there really early, and I was probably one of the first people outside the room. And I also could hear the MPs coming into the room and, through the wall, etc., debating what they were going to do. And you could realize that what they were going to do on the committee was each of them was going to ask a question. And I was on a panel with 3 other people. And the first 2 or 3 questions I really didn't know how to answer. And the only tactic that I thought was effective was not to catch the eyes of any of the MPs, because I thought if we get eye-to-eye contact, they're going to ask me to answer this question that I don't know how to answer. Well, after about 15 minutes of this select committee, I'd said absolutely nothing. I started to think this isn't the best strategy. But eventually I asked a question that I could answer. And once you start answering, you gain a little bit more confidence that people are listening to you. And I think I did a couple of things which were quite intriguing in that sense. One is that I read back a conclusion to one of their reports to them, and said that I thought their report on Carillion was really good, which I did. A great conclusion, very powerful, very persuasive, very emotive. And they made a joke of it. They said, "Oh, that's typical academic doing their homework, marking the teacher's work," or whatever type statement, and they got a little bit of a laugh. But the other thing that I said, which I think they picked up on, was the fact that when I said to them, when you're looking at the future of audit, it's really important these days that you recognize how much history there has been to future of audit studies. So I use this sort of phrase where I said, I have students on MSc and undergraduate programs sort of looking at the history of future of the audit studies, not the current future of audit studies, but the history. How much have we changed over time with the looking at the future of audit from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And you can find a lot of commonality across those things. I think that phrase caught a bit of attention, and then out of the blue, I sort of got a phone call saying, would I be interested in being involved with the advisory board for the Bryden Committee? And so again, that was another step up. Could I do this? Would I make any contribution? And again, I think what I found was, as long as I stuck to what I knew, as long as I didn't overstate or overclaim what I knew, and as long as I listened to what people were doing, I think I had quite a comfortable position, and actually was an inspiring position to be in, because there was so much discussion and so many ideas flying around. You know, as I said earlier, it was an opportunity for me to learn a heck of a lot more than I knew, but also in the process to maybe pass on a few things to other people. And another learning exercise was going on a BBC radio program. So, you know, when you start talking about impact and people say, oh yeah, get involved with the impact agenda. Well, being involved, fortunately, it was a recorded BBC program. But again, and quite a funny one, given what Joan put up at the beginning, because I think it was a program with BBC Radio 4 with Evan Davis, who was formerly on Newsnight, but again on the future of audit with a panel of people. And but before the session starts, the producers send you all sorts of questions, absolutely brilliant questions. Again, you start thinking, geez, I can't answer some of these, you know. But anyway, we managed to have a dialogue and gradually focus on some things we could contribute to. And but before the program, Evan Davis asks you, you know, could you just introduce yourself and say what you do, what you're interested, you know, what your role is at university, whatever. So I said, well, I thought, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on this or I'm an expert on that. I didn't really want to do that. So I just said that I'm a Chris Humphrey, I'm Professor of Accounting, University of Manchester, at the Manchester Business School, and I teach accounting and finance. And so, you know, he said, oh, you teach accounting and finance? He says, you mean seriously, there are people who want to study accounting and finance, you know, or at university when they've got all these subjects to talk about and study? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, and so you're at the Manchester Business School? And I said, yes, but I said, technically, you have to say the Alliance Manchester Business School, because the University of Manchester receives a major donation from Lord Alliance, and that led to the school being changed. So when the program starts, and he said, oh, thanks very much for that. So when the program starts, he says, I'd just like to introduce the panel. He says, and runs through the panelists, and then gets to me and says, and I'd just like to introduce Chris Humphrey, who is from the Manchester Business School, although I have been told to say he's from the Alliance Manchester Business School, you know, which was a bit embarrassing. But you know, and also what you realize in the program, when they do these sort of programs, they record them for up to a period of two to 3 hours, and they edit them down for half an hour. And so, you know, I tried to say various things, but they cut and select what they want to say. And it was quite interesting because one of the panelists, the main point was focusing on joint audit, and really, you know, didn't discuss a lot beyond joint audit. But I didn't initially listen to the program, but my daughter listened to it. And when the program was broadcast, I said to my daughter, what do you think? She said, well, he said, you rambled a bit, really. You know, there were too many ums and ahs and this, that, and the other. But that person who spoke about joint audit, which she was really convincing, wasn't she? But the thing was, they edit the program down to fit what Evan Davis. So every 15 minutes, Evan Davis asks a question, and then you chat. And then he asks another question, and you chat. And then the program is edited around his questions. So again, you know, when you're talking about the practicalities of impact, you realize you need to get your message over. So this person on the panel had very effectively got a message over about joint audit, you know, that I had failed to do in respect of the academic complexity of the expectation gap. You know, so that was another learning experience in a way. And I guess though probably the final couple of things that I'd like to mention in respect of impact is that I said to you earlier that it really had an impact on me. And I think what I tried to do was keep options open and just try and get people to keep reflecting on what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. And so bringing things back as much as you can to core concepts. And I think, again, that is the role of the academic very much. It's not about just trying to, you know, pinpoint something to a specific article. It's about getting the people with the power of the pen, with the power of the policy reform agenda, to actually say something or do something distinctive and different. So I would pull them back to things like, why are we, when we're looking at the future of audit, only focusing on adjustments to the market for audit services or adjustments to the regulation of audit? And we're not really talking about professionalism. We're not really talking about the concept of audit. Let's get back to some of these deeper issues. And in doing that, I started to think to myself, you know, I'm asking those questions of others, but what am I doing myself? And I then thought back to the Evan Davis program, because I'd introduced myself as a teacher, you know, and I was thinking, yes, this is potentially a research impact case, but you know where my biggest impact lies is who I teach. And I looked then at what I was teaching on auditing programs or related international accounting programs and thinking, I need to revamp what I'm teaching. I need to get my students more associated with the impact agenda itself. So I started to get my students more explicitly to look at what they wanted from the future of audit, looking at what they felt is the concept of audit. And in essence, in the summary terms, trying to teach the subject from a more normative fashion. What should auditing be rather than what is auditing? What are the current auditing standards? And in that sense, I think almost going back to probably what the teaching focus was when I started out in universities in the early 80s, which was quite normative in focus in terms of a number of the auditing textbooks, although, you know, they would obviously then run through quite a lot of practical material as well. So just thinking, but the emphasis where it was different now to the 80s is, I think, starting to get students to relate accounting to society more explicitly. Although obviously we have all these journals with society and critical perspectives in their titles, but doing that in terms of education and challenging, you know, what it means to do a relevant degree. Because I was picking up a lot of experiences from our students saying, they don't really know the value of these days doing a relevant degree, because they're competing increasingly at assessment centres for students who've done a non-relevant degree, and they don't seem to be at a great advantage for having done a relevant degree. So we started using terms like, well, shouldn't we be creating the thought leaders of the profession of tomorrow on these sort of programs? And so one of the explicit initiatives I started to do, and I've done now several times running, is to get the students to make responses to, you know, calls for views by bodies like the FRC or the Bayes Select Committee or the various government departments when they're talking about the future of audit. Getting students together from the undergraduate, from the MSc and the PhD level to form their own discussion group to discuss what they think they should be saying about the future development of audit and what the younger generation wants from audit looking forward. And we were pretty successful in that, so much so that I think Accountancy Age, in one of the submissions they made, came up and interviewed our students and spoke to them and put the students' comments, some of which were way more radical than I would have ever said. You know, I wasn't at the meeting, so couldn't demonstrate my impact again. But you know, they got quite a big hit rate in terms of views on the website. So I guess in closing, I think I came back to the view that maybe the impact agenda is a brilliant opportunity for people who can readily demonstrate the impact of their research and find it quite easy to do that. It's also a rich vein for people who are looking for impact, the impact seekers in a sense. You know, there's opportunities out there. But I also felt for maybe the more cautious people, and if I put myself in that regard, you can do something. You might not get it demonstrated visibly, but I tell you what, it's a worthwhile engagement. It adds something to your job. I think it also helps you build the experience you give your students and makes them think about things in a way that they probably never anticipated when they were coming into university. So, you know, I found myself in the last few years going into my introductory final year financial reporting course with books on saving capitalism, you know, reinventing capitalism, not so much reinventing audit, but reinventing capitalism. And then what is the social obligation of the accounting profession in that regard? What does serving the public interest mean? What do you expect from accounting firms? And getting your students to think about that. I know I still have a battle with the students who prefer numbers, who prefer doing, you know, double entry bookkeeping, although I always say to them, I love double entry bookkeeping too. So, you know, don't think that you're in a unique position. I'm as much a fan of double entry bookkeeping as you, but I think we've got bigger issues as well to talk about these days. So I guess in some sense, my message is impact is something that I think many people can engage with, whether or not it's a REF related topic. And you may well surprise yourself by just being more of a, independent, free-thinking academic in a way of the impact that you can have. And probably in that regard, some of the rest stuff, as Joan said earlier, can be quite restrictive because we're using a language which is very often oriented around rankings, verifiability. We use terms like quality research. The number of people say you've got to get a job, you've got to be able to demonstrate you're doing quality research. Now, personally, I never, when I read a paper, sit down at the end of the paper and say, well, you know what? That was a really quality research paper. I never use that language. I will use phrases like, that was really interesting, that was fascinating, that was intriguing, that surprised me. I would never use a phrase like quality. It's a bit like audit quality. What does audit quality mean? You have to start to explain it. And so I think with impact as well, it's the same thing. You just start to break it down a little bit. There are different ways you can break it down. You can break it down a ref way. You can break it down what might be a ref way, and you can break it down which may be a teaching way and something else like this. And I think if you view it like that, there's scope for everyone to engage with this from their own teaching courses all the way through to a verified impact case for the ref submission. Okay, so that's roughly what I want to say, Joan.
That's excellent, Chris. I like that idea of there's different sorts of people and different types of impact that people can go for. So, you've got the impact case, people who want to write an impact case study, an awful lot of work, and you're right, you're constrained and you have to make sure it's designed, etc. I like that impact seekers, which is a slightly different thing, that we can all be impact seekers, actually, I think, Chris. And the more cautious, I like that. I like that idea you said at the end of bringing the impact into your classroom and thinking about what can I do differently to actually, hot the room up a bit or make people a bit more interested, get them involved. We're always talking about critical skills, aren't we? Trying to get the students to be critical thinkers. So, surely that is one way of certainly doing that. Now, has anybody any direct questions they want to ask Chris before we close for our coffee? So a lot of good responses there, Chris. Thank you for sharing your experience, very insightful, encouraging. Yeah, I think we just got as much from that, Chris, even though you didn't submit a case. And I liked your, the idea you had about you almost have to be careful because in terms of there's different ways to get different impact. And you're right, the ref impact thing only corrals a certain type of impact. It doesn't corral all of it.
It is difficult, Joan. I mean, it's so tempting at times as well, when you feel I've got, you're sitting there probably thinking I've got this once in a lifetime opportunity, can I do something with it? But at the same stage, I think you've sort of got to be, a little bit broader in your thinking and say, no, actually, there's a bigger agenda here. It's not my agenda. It's a broader agenda. And I don't want that to sound like I'm, completely selfless or whatever. But I think it's just a sense that if you tag into the bigger picture, I think people are more likely to listen to you than if they spot you selling one line.
Yes.
And sometimes also it's very difficult because there are different angles. And what I was saying in the speech as well is that what I found is that one of the things that, and I think we underestimate this as academics because you don't realize, in a sense, although we do talk about increasing levels of centralization or increasing constraints on us or this, that, and the other, but you still have a great capacity to think as an academic, and you probably understate the skills. And I'm by no way the best person at that. And that's one of the messages I wanted to try and get over. If somebody managed to get me to present at the House of Commons, then there's lots of other people can do a far better job than I did. I'm really sure of that. And just if that opportunity comes up, go for it, because I think the panel also respect the fact that people are coming to this without a sort of economic interest, in a sense, in what they're saying.
Yes, you're far too modest, Chris.
No, I'm not, Joan, I tell you.
Any other queries or thoughts, or is everybody just wanting to go and have a quick break before we get into the Zoom breakout rooms? Sarah?
I was just going to say thank you, Chris. I thought it was refreshing because to hear somebody with your experience still to be concerned when going into that sort of level of conversation, you know, that is refreshing. And I think for the younger members of who are listening in the audience to think that, you know, we don't know it all, as it were, and Jonah said, you know, you're very humble in terms of the way that that you approached it, and I think that's a very important lesson for everybody to hear, that, you know, give it a go. You might not think, you know, I think we all underestimate actually what skills we can bring to the table, and you had the confidence to do it and got on with it and ran with it. So you know, brilliant.
There's one other thing, Sarah, on that I probably could have mentioned as well, is that I said earlier that I had to sign some legal papers. And in one sense, that's a frustration because there's so much that I think I could say, you know, which was about the way in which, you know, people approach the task and the different interactions on meetings and this, that, and the other. But, you know, that was the arrangement with the committee, and that's how that was the rules they were required to follow, I think, by the government. But the benefit of that was that, you know, when somebody knows you're on a committee like this, then suddenly you start to get all of these requests to go somewhere or say something, or people ringing up saying, you know, especially before the reports come out, saying, you know, sort of like, it's a little like students trying to find out, you know, what's on the exam paper. And I had it was so nice to be able to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I signed legal documents, you know, that I can't, will prevent me from saying anything, you know. But it was just a very convenient way, and then it allowed us to get onto other things. And one other little incident that was quite memorable was I did a presentation once at Old Trafford, Manchester United football ground, and we were talking about the future of audit. And when we got there, it was a breakfast meeting, so it was the professional side, but it was dark. And then it was only as the light came on, it was midwinter, but you started to see the ground as it was illuminated, and there was this little poster, and it was about Sir Alex Ferguson, and it you know, it was sort of said something like the Sir Alex Ferguson, the unrealizable dream, or whatever the song is, and then it says something like, you know, achieved. And so I made a link which I thought was quite nice, because I said if we could just swap Sir Alex Ferguson for the audit expectation gap, you know, maybe that's what we could be doing, is, you know, the unrealizable dream, audit expectation gap achieved, you know. So the venues you can sort of get into with all of the future of audit were quite fascinating. And I would suspect, you know, what I really enjoyed the most was that it brought another dimension to your work. And I think that's something that we lose a little bit. And this can apply even to the most basic of first year accounting courses. We've got a lot to offer students. And I think we probably, in all of this, you know, commercialization and marketization of programs and increasing numbers and this, that, and the other fee regimes, we lose the fact that really we've got a lot to offer students on accounting and finance degrees. And so the more people, in my mind, we have interacting with this, and I think what Kelum's presentation showed before, you know, I've just talked largely about a UK context, but the capacity to influence the whole emerging nations sort of arena, you know, looking at what the UN is doing, look at the World Bank, look at a whole variety of NGOs, and to have this reflective sort of balanced perspective in a way, or informed perspective, and trying to get people to think slightly differently about the way in which they approach these topics. That's what it made me think differently about the nature and role of audit, and what we conceive of audit. And that's after, you know, 30 odd 40 years of accepting particular definitions. And I think if people can do that and see that this sort of broad-minded education process is something not only that we influence students, but you can hit the policy level. I could see the potential impact of accounting and finance being a lot greater in the future. And we have messages, and I guess the final point just to mention, Joan, is we have messages for the wider social science community that I think doesn't really understand the depth and seriousness and the willingness to accept ambiguity that accounting and finance scholars and students do. You know, I think we have a lot to teach management scholars about the way in which they approach the accounting finance discipline.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. So I think what we'll do, we'll go and have our break now, and we'll come back and go into our breakout rooms for 3 o'clock. So Sarah, if we can, I don't know, maybe 4 groups would probably be enough, and we just allocate randomly if that's okay. So if you go into your breakout rooms, and don't forget, let me just actually, maybe I should copy and paste this into the chat line so everybody can see that. So basically, when you're in your chat rooms or your individual rooms, if you can have a think about how can you make your research more impactful, who would be the beneficiaries, and what are the benefits and the pitfalls, okay? And then we'll see you back roughly about maybe 25 past 3 o'clock, okay? So have a nice cup of coffee, and thank you everyone for engaging so far. We could get a kind of some views that came forward from, say, Chris, from your group. What kind of things did you chat about? I know there wasn't that many people in your group.
Yeah, we just chatted about a range of topics, to be honest, but I think a few things was the extent to which the REF definition obviously talks about impact being outside the university or outside of academia. So obviously some of my references to students would not be, you know, readily encaptured in that definition. But obviously if you take a longer term perspective and these students go outside of academia, then what you can teach them and train them to think and do does mean it will have an impact. And I think given the international nature of the cohorts that we're teaching, I think that is a really important side of academia's potential impact to consider.
Okay, that's perfect.
Another thing we spoke about was just the extent to which people have time available. I mean, particularly from Kelum's, you know, the amount of work that goes into the preparation of that type of a case. To what extent can you get support to construct those cases? Because it can, I don't know, Kelum might want to say a bit more, but I mean, personally, I did get some letters submitted, but it wasn't something I really wanted to request. And I felt a little bit embarrassed having to ask for somebody to write a letter. It's a little bit like, you know, getting a note from the teacher saying you've been a good person in class, you know. So, you know, if there was some way of keeping you independent of that, I would far rather not know so much of what people are saying and allow them the freedom to say it than to sort of police what they comment on and then have to put that case together. And also archiving the impact is not easy. I think you can archive processes or events and things like that, but being able to judge the overall impact. And I think, you know, people like Mike Power have written about that, you know, saying that there are benefits to this evidential process, but there are also risks that it can commodify the production of research impact. And you maybe lose certain types of impact because of that. So those are some of the things we discussed.
Excellent. Kelum, do you want to say anything about the time? That is a big issue, isn't it? The time frame, the time to devote to an impact case study is quite significant.
Yeah, I think Chris is spot on, and he's right. And this is what the Premsika and Premsika was at Essex. So he was our main person that working on the impact. So like same as Chris is also very, I mean, we all are critical accounting researchers in that sense. So we were having the same view, like I also had the same view like Chris. But the one thing I think my response to Chris' point, and then one thing I reflect with my work is, yes, it's time consuming, but at the same time, we are like personally that we are, I mean, I am passionate to work with these outsiders in the sense sharing and giving my critical thoughts and then make them understand this, that things that they haven't seen in the past, in before. So that kind of active engagement needs some passion as well from our side. I think it's like not like this writing a paper. Like when you think about writing a paper, we can have a workshop and say these are the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a one way. The other way is that we enjoy the work, and then we like not like the journalist, but we like making using our critical thinking. We enjoy the paper writing. There are two ways. So at least we must be in the middle range in that sense that when you are doing impact case, yes, one way, at least some passion plus some organization of work, how to manage our available times into that. And also the one other thing that I have to highlight at University of Essex, we had this problem of lack of support at the beginning, but over this last 2 years before the submission, we had excellent support environment. Like we had this writing people, and then impact officers, and then financial support, and then also WAM, workload allocation model. They selected potential good papers, good impact case writers. They given more time in the WAM to devote our times. So I think we had excellent research environment in that sense to support the impact case writers. For example, is our business school, we had 10 impact cases. So they identified 14 people in the first round. All these 14 people are given the time, the resources, everything, and even funding as well, if you wanted to travel for these institutions or the places. So that's the sort of two things that I have.
What sort of time, just interestingly, did you get off to write your impact case?
You mean the time?
Was it like a module that you get released from doing a module, or? Yeah.
Yeah, so you know that we all have institutions, we all allocation model, like 1,200 hours for the research, admin, and the teaching. So then I was exempted from some of my admin roles, and so then the less teaching. So then I had involved with more traveling, and then more evidence gathering and all this work. So that's a sort of a thing. It's like a motivation to the impact case writers. So Essex was very constructive in that sense, because we have excellent staff student ratio in that sense. Not the perfect, but a better ratio. So we have light teaching in that sense. So yeah, okay. It's not the same with the other institutions, I guess. But
okay. Yeah. Any other queries from or observations from David, Laura, or admin?
I mean, I wasn't in the room just now, like I said, but I was just wondering, Kelum, do you have any other kind of recognition in your institution for doing impact, or is it just the allocation in the workload model?
No, yeah, we have recognition in the sense like what kind of appreciation, like we have a kind of award scheme, like every year we have assessment, like so we can apply to best impact case awards. So university giving rewards, financial, like the research account, there's a kind of a reward money, and if you want time allocations, they give that package, one of these packages as a reward, the winning impact case writer. So international impact cases, national level, local level impact cases, they recognize two things. So social science faculty not 3 awards. So likewise, so then winner getting £2,000 research money, second 1,500, third 1,000. So these are, I know, very small stuff, but that recognition and appreciation, and there's award ceremony is doing that.
Yeah, nice.
So these this neoliberal kind of things. Anyway, capitalist sort of way of encouraging and promoting ref discourse. I know it. I'm a critical researcher, but at the same time, I'm a pragmatist in some sense. Like, yes, we are critical, but at the same time, we have to contribute. Like Prem Sikka involved with the labor policies. Now in the in the parliament, is a lot of parliament. So he's doing contribute active engagement. So constructivism and critical thinking has to some way contribute. Otherwise, no point becoming a Derrida or kind of Derridian thing is good, deconstruction. So we have to reconstruct some way against capitalism or whatever these institutions are. We have to make sure at least they coming into moral capitalist kind of a middle ground. That's what I'm trying to do. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, institution knows our one. constructively helping and engaging with the impact case writers. They did their best within their limitations and the policies and the regulations. Yes.
There is a conceptual issue to consider with respect to the extent to which the impact case study type initiative is a catalyst or stimulus for the promotion of impact, or whether it serves, in a sense, to discourage or steer people away because of its association with the funding regime. You know, in a way that why the impact case study is being done, because as you point out in your slides, Joan, you know, one way maybe is to, like we were saying earlier, encourage and promote a different dimension of research, but it also has a clear direct funding implication. And I don't know whether, you know, obviously it's very difficult to assess the relative costs and benefits or impacts on either side. But I think in some ways, you can see this notion of the highlighting of impact case studies could well deter others from engaging with it. Maybe wrongly so, but I think it's a consideration as to how much, once you set this regime in process, I mean, do you have to have this level of complexity to a funding scheme? Once you set the idea of impact in motion, how do you best make it flourish? Because I suspect as we go into, you know, the so-called post-COVID world, you know, how willing will organisations to be to participate in these evidential processes, or will they see they've got bigger priorities? I guess a lot of that would also depend on the strength of the research impact on them, may well be, you know, and the value that they see from it. But I think there is a case for considering, you know, if you're looking at a time scenario, where do you go next? Do you institutionalize the process in much more depth and give it much more specificity, or do you let go? And do you release the spirit of what you've tried to create and maybe see what happens as a result of that? Because I think people have got the message that research not only does but should have impact, you know, and how are they going to respond to that?
Good points, Chris. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Any other points anybody would like to state, or David, did you anything else you wanted to say? No?
I had a nice discussion with Chris. I'm sorry you weren't there, Laura. Apologies for just, you know, discussing different teachings and experiences. Who are the beneficiaries? Our students, we felt, was a classic. Not sure if we're allowed to put that in impact studies.
And Padmina, did you have any, you want to say anything else? No.
On beneficiaries, you mean?
Just any other queries or observations?
Oh, I think we were with Kelum and Tui, and we just basically, briefly we discussed, I think, and Tui kind of discussed how she could bring that into the classroom in accounting education. So she said that, because anyway, she's also in her final years or so, so it's kind of early stage for us to kind of say who will be the kind of beneficiaries. But that's what we discussed. But with what I want to say is basically, I know this is kind of a very, I'm kind of quite learning in the learning process of these impact case studies. To some certain extent, I agree with what Chris says. But on the other hand, me coming from industry with private sector research background, and I know those particular organizations, they're quite interested about this, how the action research, basically. That's how I see it. Because when I joined academia, I found there is a clear gap between these two. And whatever the academics do, of course, they have some impact, but it's not, I don't know, the visibility of the impact was kind of questionable. So to some certain extent, I agree that, you know, there should be some kind of weight should be given to these impact case studies. But the problem is how much are we kind of aware of the process, and whether the process of this evaluation kind of thing is, whether it's the right way to do it, that I don't know it. But I do actually value impact case studies, because at the end of the day, what I believe is, as a researcher, whatever we do should have some impact on any other kind of stakeholders. But my other criticism wise is, there are some research which is kind of very, very difficult for us to kind of say specifically there is some impact. Like that's why I asked that question about evidence. It's not always, easy for us to provide that sort of evidence. Of course, if it's a policy impact or something like Kelum explained before, we can request, or we can either somehow we can get that. But there could be some research which might be impacting wider audiences, maybe like societal. So how do we kind of, provide some evidence to the sort of, studies that we do? So that is something that I'm kind of struggling to understand, basically. I asked that question in many other kind of events where I attended, because I'm kind of learning about this thing, but I couldn't get a very clear answer for that question. So if you are doing research, which might be kind of, giving or maybe increasing the awareness level, for example, so how can we kind of measure it, or how can we provide some evidence on those things?
Chris, do you want to say something about that?
Oh,
are you okay?
One thing we haven't spoken about is the issue of paywalls and issues around open access and related funding for open access schemes. Because I think the first point in relation to building an impact case study is that either somebody somewhere has to become interested in the work you're doing, or interested in the findings of the work, or interested in you because of those findings. So they need to be able to access and read and reach that type of research. Obviously, that can come directly from the papers themselves if they're able to get access to them. Otherwise, it comes through the way in which that research is communicated in other sources, whether you're writing directly for a professional journal or trade publication, or some social media type site, or like Kelum was saying, there's an engagement with various authorities, through some sort of professional membership or whatever. So I think that's the big thing, is how people become aware. And I suspect that was one of the points I was trying to express, really, is when some of these opportunities come, where somebody says, we're potentially interested in you coming to talk to us, don't duck it, to seize that opportunity. Because I could have said a lot more about other colleagues, for instance, I know quite closely, not just at Manchester, but elsewhere, who have done brilliantly in terms of making that sort of engagement. And you look at the cohort of people that Kelum's working with, for instance, and say your engagement with Trevor Hopper and other people, and just look how, certain networks of researchers have been created, and how they then fill in and build or filter in and build to with respect to organizations like, UNCTAD or whatever. You can see, and then also national governments who then come in, and being able to be some sort of filter mechanism between the interaction between national governments and professional bodies, for instance. I think that's a very important role for researchers to play. And we've got a lot of people now, not maybe people who have just become professors, who've got great capacity in those areas. So I would say the more we're able to make that work available is really important. And that also comes through invites. I mean, I've had a number of colleagues who've been invited to, something like I'd like to speak to a royal commission in a number of, you might want to say a bit more, Kelum, because it's really directly related to your stuff.
Yeah, I think Chris is again really spot on and right. And I mean, these joining these networks and engage with their activities. I mean, like for example, now I'm the buffer president of this special interest group in accounting and emerging economies. So I know these colleagues who are like working in with the different stakeholders in emerging economies, like in Africa, and then African accounting associations, African governments. So then I think we receive so many invitations to our organization, to our special interest group, that inviting and asking anyone from, say, for example, Kenya, do we have a colleague that who can help for this our sort of little work, that consultancy work in this area, local government, policy making, in participatory budgeting, for example. So we share this with our colleagues. So I mean, even starting from that bigger networks and then going into like very little areas, like maybe professional accounting membership, working for SCA, and this sort of work, I mean, this network, social capital is the starting point for this this sort of impact initiatives, and thinking with your research plus thinking about how we fill the research practice gap in that sense. So that is a very, very vital thing. And I know the African Accounting Association, I'm a member of that. So many of work going on nowadays. We don't call it impact, but sort of knowledge transfer activities that having the potential for impact. So I have to leave. I have another meeting, but one more point I have to say. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned about this working as teams. So I think that's another good way to handle this problem of time consumption and resource needs and all that what we need we have in this impact case development and the investment for the future. So I think if you work as a team, like I am doing now, one best example is our climate change activities we are doing it. I mentioned World Bank and PIFA. So we have our team, so working in 3 countries and then writing and reflecting what we are doing and organizing. So we have different roles to each other. So at the end, after maybe a few years' time, we collectively develop the impact case. So yeah, I am using my strength as the educator in that sense, communicating to wider audience, bringing that connection to my team at Essex. So we are combining our synergies together. So that's another way to handle this challenge. And so one way, the answer into Padmi's question about how we go through this thing, how we develop this connection and the route for the social or community or institutional level impact, so that the networks help us to reach and frame us there. The number 2 is the time and the challenge and the resource requirements, the working with the team. So that's another one way to, probably one synergy that we have with the group is that we can allocate all these our times and the resources among ourselves and expertise as well. So that's one of the best ways to strategically handle impact case development.
Okay.
Yeah, I talk a lot. Maybe my internet is not stable, so sometimes it stops. I know you had the difficulty with that. I apologize for that. I know it. Sorry about that. It's the internet some issue today. So I have to leave now. I have another meeting. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights and you spending the time today to come out of your busy schedule, and we hope to see you again.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a pleasure that sharing, little things that we have experienced in our life, so academic life. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, Kelum. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Okay. Joan, well, just one other thing that just to pick up on what Colin was saying there is the issue of support. Because I think in one sense you as you start to build a team, the commitment levels really do massively grow. And I know in my own case, it was really surprising. We had an administrator supporting some of the work we were doing around auditing reform and stuff like this. And what she put together in terms of just some of the engagement we'd had was incredible once you started to list it out. But we wouldn't have, you just lose tabs on it. And I think also that you need a backup in the way of starting to push this material out through a variety of sources so that people start to pick up on these things. And I think it's quite interesting when and I don't know if Laura got any reflections on this, but if you were to look at like, I don't know what money the impact case studies bring in per se, but if you're offering like a small prize for the best impact case, and that's the or a little bit of an increment or something like that, obviously it would help with promotion cases, I know, but you know, resourcing these things properly in a way where it's not just a case of giving people rewards because of the impact case, but actually helping to engender the impact, I think is really vital. I don't think we would have had some of the engagement that we had just outside of my own efforts at Manchester if we hadn't had that sort of support from one or two, you know, individuals particularly. And I think if we could sustain that and build it, there's a lot more that you can do. And you can see it now, I suspect. I mean, I don't know if we've got anybody who's expert in sort of the CSR, ESG arena, but you can see the way that is going to explode in the coming months and years ahead. And it is going to be, you know, a massive growth area, I suspect, for accounting and consulting firms. And yet, one of the things that accounting academia has is the history of engagement. I mean, David and I were talking about papers by people like Rob Gray and Tony Hope from, you know, the late 70s, early 1980s. I mean, you know, it's 50 years ago. And we have this history that a lot of, you know, come latelys, in a sense, to ESG and CSR will not have. Now, it might not be the solution providing history that people want, but it is the conceptual underpinnings and the way in which ideas have developed over time, the knowledge of what's been claimed, tried to be done, not achieved, this, that, and the other, which can cast a very different light on claims being made at the moment. And I think if you were looking at that from again, a broader conception and nature of impact, we potentially could be developing all sorts of alternative ways of promoting, you know, ideas and different agendas in this, but we need that institutional support. And I don't think the way the academic, you know, research and teaching or academic and, you know, scholarship roles are going leaves a lot of space for really doing this properly. And often one of the phrases you hear is, you know, I'm working like a cottage industry. You know, I'm doing a lot of this on my own with one or two trusted colleagues. Now, maybe with Kelum's case, you know, it went up to six or seven people, but I'm sure there's more we could do if it wasn't all coming back down onto us.
Yeah, Chris, I do have some reflections on that. So at Swansea in the School of Management, our case studies sort of really took off when I got involved in the last 18 months. So I really rolled my sleeve up and acted as a co-author on those case studies. So my particular background is I've got a PhD from Swansea, so I understand research. But prior to that, I worked in science communication. So I also understand kind of marketing and writing for non-academic audiences. So I was kind of really well placed to be able to do that role. But my understanding from speaking to other people across the university is that they don't feel that people who perhaps work in the marketing team or some of the other teams, the research support teams, that they have the right skills to be able to support them in the way they need to be supported. But I think you're absolutely right. I think they need resources. And I think, you know, money is a big thing in terms of when it comes to, you were talking about dissemination earlier. Although dissemination can't be counted as ref impact, it's a really critical intermediary step to putting your stuff from journal article in front of the right people who can actually use the research. So this is a conversation that we're having at the moment to try and kind of, you know, make the case for funding dissemination activities, because at the minute people are a bit reluctant to do so because it doesn't count as ref per se. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's a puzzle, isn't it, really, why that definition excludes dissemination, if that's a very direct impact that a lot of, you know, people in the social sciences, for instance, could claim as a speciality. I think also, Laura, yeah,
like you have like big aims and objectives to have more impact. Well, you can only have more impact if you have the vehicles for putting the research in front of people. You can't do that without resources. So yeah. It's
I know. I think quite a few universities did what you were saying as well with writing. I know at Manchester we had some really great contributions in many respects, because you are very close to the stuff you're doing, and maybe you need somebody just to give you this different way of representing the case, and that's also a really multifaceted skill. because you're going to be potentially dealing with impact case studies from all sorts of fields. And I know people did appreciate that support. And but I think it's like you say, it's taking it beyond that to institutionalizing it in a deeper sense of the way, so that you can almost encourage or encapsulate or incorporate more people into that. And I think, yeah, dissemination, once people feel that their work is getting out there, because I think that's one of the things the accounting firms are really good at, or one of the number of things they're really good at, because they spot these opportunities and they can move so much more quickly than we do. And yeah, we actually have, I mean, you often hear the story that, consulting agencies buy in whole units to deliver, in a breaking arena, in a sense. And we seem to just be a little bit slower out the gates in a way. And I'm sure there's a lot more we could do, because we do have a different message to tell, really. I'm not sure sometimes whether it's the most marketable message, but if you're really dealing with some of these topics seriously and looking at impact in a deep sense of the word, then what we can contribute, I think, is incredibly valuable.
Definitely. I think Sarah's team at Swansea, we've met with all of those researchers recently, and they've got some really interesting stuff going on. And I can definitely, like you mentioned CSR just now, and I can definitely see us developing case studies in that area. It's just everybody we're speaking to is saying, like you mentioned, like, we just don't have the time to do it. We haven't got the resources, which is why I was quite interested in what was it Kelum who was saying that they have an allowance in the workload model, which I don't think we have at Swansea at the moment. And I think that's a really important bit of feedback that I'm going to take back.
Yeah, I think he also said about his staff-student ratio. I think he said they were in a good position, as a lot of people aren't, Laura. Some people, their staff-student ratio is 35:1, and they're teaching a lot of modules. I find that you're this thing about impact, just talking to different people, that people are not getting the support in terms of the time off to do this. I mean, it's not time off, actually. It's a simple reallocation of duties, because when you're doing impact, you're I mean, if I just think of the project I'm involved in, since the summer, we've presented till about maybe 15 different groups of people. And it's one meeting after. It's not just a meeting, it's actually doing presentations, doing round tables under Chatham House rules, trying to write all that up, all the follow-up that comes after that. I mean, you wouldn't be at it, it just takes so much time. But you're not getting any extra time, Laura. It's just like supposedly part of your normal routine.
Yeah, it's not good enough, is it? Not if institutions want to have these sort of big aims and objectives around achieving impact, then they need to make sure that people have got the time to commit to it properly. It's catch-22.
Joan, that's a really interesting point you raise as well, is just the process. That it just reminded me of something in relation to the Bryden review, that if somebody just say it's at a public meeting and a topic comes up and you think, gosh, that's really relevant, but I don't know very much about that, and I suspect maybe that might be an issue that gets raised on the advisory board, and somebody will come and say, so what's the research on this? It's not easy to say, well, sorry, actually, I don't know anything about this. So you've got to move quickly.
Oh, you do, and then you have to be in a position, because you say that come up before, Chris. You don't want to get into the next meeting with the expectation that might come up again. So you're doing more preparation to try and anticipate what they're going to ask you. It's really quite it really is quite challenging, because we had a meeting there with some of the local governments, and I hadn't realized, but some of our local government organizations, the political parties, put forward for this 4-day week in Iceland. And anyway, luckily, there was one view was given in the meeting, but when the meeting finished, there was a lady, she stayed behind. I should really stop the recording, but she stayed behind and she told me quite a bit about the reality of the situation. But I wasn't. Huh? I wasn't
Still-
prepared. I wasn't prepared, actually. I hadn't read up enough about that, you know. So you're right, Chris, you're kind of caught with like a rabbit with the headlights. You're thinking, I don't really know enough about this and I should know more.
And I think there's also a related thing to that, is that, so there's then skill sets, you know, so it's not just a case of, you know, how you write an impact case. I suspect also there's skill training with regard to what you would need to do in relation to promote, you know, getting the most from the type of work you're doing, so that you have the most impact in the opportunity that's been presented to you. And sometimes as well, that does raise back the question of what is impact, because two things on that. One is, you've got to know, in a way, just how to work through a search engine so that you don't produce loads of irrelevant stuff, or you find the most pertinent stuff and find it in a you know, a publication outlet that's understandable to the people you're working with. And so I was often very much trying to find stuff that, if I was dealing with responses, say to some type of issue that's come up post the publication of Bryden, just trying to find out what people would suit people best as a way of helping them to get to grips with some of the messages in the report. The other thing as well, though, in just running through that, is almost an education process, that when you're dealing in these impact related situations, some people do want solutions, you know, and they expect the academic to be the solution provider. So really sometimes, you know, and the impact agenda, in a way, if you've got a paper that gives a very specific finding to a very specific problem, then probably it's much more easier to say that your paper had impact, because people draw on it to justify action in relation to a specific problem. But if the literature is very divided, and then people are coming to you as the academic advisor or something, and say, so what's the view on this? You know, and you say, well, it's mixed, you know, no, that's not good enough. I need a clear-cut view. And so in some ways, your role as the academic to have impact is to educate people to recognize why the research is different in different studies in terms of the results they find, or why in different contexts certain reforms seem to have a bigger impact and they have a lesser impact in other contexts. And so, you know, that type, now, is that dissemination? Is that education? Whatever the term is. But I think in some ways, those are the behind the scenes decision you have to make as an advisor, is that you're trying to sensitize people to some of the complexities of the issues they're working with, which may well lead to certain policy reform proposals losing legs, losing support, and other actions gaining support, because they start to realize, hang on a minute, these, like I said in the speech, these quick fix solutions have probably got little likelihood of working. You also realize from the other side that maybe the arena wants the quick fix solutions. And so you start maybe to realize that actually this is an opportunity for impact, but I'm really worried that this is going to disintegrate a little bit, because I can see what people want is they just want this solution. And if it lasts for a couple of years, that'll be fine. Now, do I want to be the person who's advocating that? Probably no, I wouldn't, you know. And so I think that's another side to the whole impact agenda, is it's not just a case of producing the reports for the impact case studies. It's about enabling people to be in a position where they can have impact in a way that they feel content with, you know, and feel is intellectually or socially productive.
Yeah, it's quite fraught with difficulty, isn't it? The whole thing, Chris, is quite difficult. But I think we had an interesting discussion today. So I think overall
we've had an impact on the audience.
well, no, but I think the problem is that the audience probably left because, as Sarah said, maybe the timing isn't exactly brilliant, because people are writing examination papers at this time of the year, Chris. But I think we did. I know I have to do one myself too. I haven't done it yet. But I think generally, I think people did interact with us, and there were two really good examples. I think the two presentations, Chris, were very balanced, because Kelum was definitely going for the impact. You had the impact, but it was a different, you know, you definitely had the impact and you could have written it up. In fact, and more, in many ways, actually, you probably had more impact potentially.
I suspect, I don't know, Joan, but I would say, you know, to the defense of my university, I think given the time, you know, the impact probably we had to demonstrate needed to be more than we were able to do, you know, so I can understand why somebody wouldn't have run with the case. But on the other level, it's this notion of how you engender those and develop those cases, I think, and if they've got, you know, obviously as they had very well prepared cases, then this would have been a much more riskier case for them to use. But yeah, as I tried to, what I tried to do, rather than, you know, saying, oh, unlucky I didn't have a case, it's more like the agenda is bigger than that. And I recognize there's some really great cases out there, but also I think trying to build that spirit that people do not need to see this as an impossible dream. Type thing, you know, that there are different scales and levels of impact. And I think, you know, from the longer term impact on your students as their careers develop to maybe a short-term interaction with a funding agency that's looking for a particular solution, you know, you've got a long sort of continuum in which to position yourself, and that will change over time as well. But I think it's really important not to underestimate for the younger people just how many opportunities there are there, especially given their broader based political, you know, social experiences, you know, coming from a variety of cultural contexts. You know, you might find, I mean, I'm finding with some of my colleagues that they're able to access to a level of political engagement in terms of seniority that there's no way I could do that. You know, so they're coming from countries where they can connect to quite high levels in the government with really strong messages. And I suspect, you know, Kelum's case is a very good illustration of that. And I'm sure there's probably a good number of others around in the UK academic accounting and finance community that would support that type of conclusion. And obviously, you know, like I mentioned, there's people like Trevor Hopper who have spent years nurturing and building those sort of impacts, and a number of other people, you know, universities like Essex, Sussex, Glasgow, you know, just run them off really, I think have sought very explicitly Sheffield to build some of those things.
Yeah. Okay, well, you've given us lots of food for thought, Chris. I think that's, and Kelum too. So thank you so much again, Chris, for your contributions to CDAF. We really do appreciate it. I mean, maybe for the purposes of the video, Sarah, I will just mention the next event, which is the Friday, the 4th of March. So the first Friday in March, Building Sustainability into the Accounting and Finance Curriculum, and Ian Thompson from University of Birmingham is going to speak at that. Okay, and then the last thing really is just to keep connected. So I think, Sarah, that concludes.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's really nice, though, Joan. That all links to what we were saying.
Yes. So excellent. So perhaps we can turn the recording off now.